Hi there, it's Rachel Thexton with Rachel Thexton Connects. I'm excited to present my next guest, Chris Campbell, a veteran journalist now leading the Surrey Citizen, Surrey, British Columbia's newest digital news publication. We discuss something that is incredibly vital for our society and for every resident of every city in Canada, and that is community news. And we learn more about Chris Campbell and his 35 years in journalism, community journalism. I present to you Chris Campbell, coming up next on Rachel Thexton Connects. Okay, so it's always exciting for me to welcome a journalist to the podcast. I studied journalism. I'm a massive supporter, advocate for the value of journalism. And it's thrilling to have on the podcast today a veteran journalist and senior reporter with a brand new digital news publication called the Surrey Citizen. I'd like to welcome Chris Campbell to Rachel Thexton Connects. Thank you for being here, Chris.
No problem. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm always happy to spread the word about journalism.
Yes, and that is, I think you're the perfect person to do that. Before we started recording, Chris and I were chatting. We have been kind of communicating back and forth for over 2 decades on various beats and various roles that we've both had, me on the communication side and you as a journalist who has worked in this space for so long. And really, let me via my questions, because I want to learn more about you and kind of your history and how you got to where you are today. You have devoted your entire life to journalism, specifically community journalism. But can you tell me a little bit about growing up here in BC? I understand that you were born in British Columbia, correct?
Yes. Born.
And what it was like?
Born in Burnaby. Grew up completely in Burnaby, North Burnaby to be specific. I'm very competitive saying that North Burnaby is superior to South Burnaby. That's just
we just moved from there, so I know the area.
Yeah, and actually, I left for a while, and now I'm actually back in Burnaby, living in Burnaby. But I've grown up my whole life in Metro Vancouver. I've had stops in Coquitlam and Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows for a while. I mean, I'm not embarrassed of my age. I'm in my 50s. I grew up in the 1970s and the 1980s. Friends and I, we always joke about like, geez, how did, like, because we've all raised our own kids in a different way than our parents raised us, like in certain ways and stuff, in some ways the same. And, we always joke about 1970s and how are we still alive? Because, when you look at how protective we were with our own kids and almost bubble wrap. I mean, I have a daughter who's 26 now, and, my ex-wife and I, we practically bubble wrapped her and in a lot of ways and stuff. And yet back in the 70s, I mean, seatbelts were, those things that were sort of next to us. I remember seatbelts being introduced, when I was a kid and being like, oh, what do I do with this? My parents going, yeah, I guess you can put it on. I don't know. And, like,
it's up to you.
I mean, like I looked at one of my old photos of when I was a kid, and you could see around the shirt, one of my class photos, there's a little string, and at the end of the string was my key, right? Because so I wouldn't lose it. My mom made me put it around my neck so I wouldn't lose it during the day, because I went to school on my own and I came home alone, and I would let myself in and let the dog out and feed the dog and stuff like that and make myself. And then my parents would get home at, I don't know, 5 o'clock when they finished work and stuff. Like, they call us latchkey kids and stuff. And
latchkey kids.
Yeah, and
I was one as well.
And I've explained that concept to my daughter, and she's just like, what? What are you talking about? Because
it sounds insane.
She's jealous of the freedom that we had back then. And I don't know if we called it freedom back then, but and we were just so reckless, riding our bikes and crashing into stuff and fireworks, setting off fireworks all the time. You look at people freaking out about fireworks and how it scares their animals. And it's like, well, back then, 7-year-olds were firing off cherry bombs, and it's lucky any of us have
cherry bombs.
Yeah, it's lucky any of us have fingers anymore and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's how I grew up, and loved North Burnaby, loved the Burnaby Heights. Still love, I love being back in Burnaby. And my fiance, She's
Yeah.
originally from China, and she has fallen in love with Burnaby Heights. She loves all the businesses, the Glenbird soda fountain for ice cream, and the great
Yes.
restaurants and stuff, and just walking around and stuff. And you know, I'm so happy that my old neighborhood really hasn't changed. I mean, it's changed, but not that much. It's still charming, and it's great to be back there. And I had a good childhood, you know, as far as that goes and stuff. And I
Yeah.
was
And did you always know?
I was raised as being very media literate. Like you know, my parents always had newspapers around, and my mom used to listen to, I think it was CHQM, which back then was a Muzak station, like, you know, elevator music,
Yeah.
but had
Yeah.
constant news and stuff. And you know, my mom is 86, still lives in North Burnaby, and still listens to the news all the time on the radio when she's in her car. Will not miss global news at 6 o'clock. Like that's part of her schedule.
Yeah.
Shout out to Claudette Campbell. Yeah, so I was
Hmm.
raised listening to the news a lot, and I didn't necessarily know that I was going to be a journalist, but I grew up very interested in the news and things that was going on. I remember being deeply devastated by catching. My parents used to watch 60 Minutes, which back then
Hmm.
was even bigger than it is now, and I remember being devastated. This report about, you know, the threat of nuclear war. And I don't know, I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I couldn't sleep for days after that. But I remember being so impacted by a news report,
Yes.
and that impacted my life. And that influenced me definitely over the years. I didn't quite consciously know that it did, but I do know that it did. I always knew that I loved writing. Like I didn't necessarily know how that was going to manifest itself, but I've always been a writer, even when I was a kid and a teenager. My teachers used to joke that, you know, even if I didn't really understand the answer that I was giving or didn't quite get it right, I always wrote in such an entertaining way that they would give me extra marks for that because, you know, I put a lot of effort into my writing and was obsessed with writing, kept a secret diary journal that I actually,
Oh,
I
did
don't think
you?
my mom even to this day knows that I had kept that.
Do you?
No, I lost it over the years through moving and stuff. That
Yeah.
was devastating. I still have my teddy bear, believe it or not, from when I was a baby. But
Teddy
yeah, but
Ruxpin or
no, just a standard teddy bear. Anyway,
an old
but
one you had?
sorry, I tend to babble. But yeah, I kept the diary. I wrote constantly.
Yeah.
Loved writing assignments because I was terrible in most other subjects like science and math. Terrible at math, awful at math. And
Me as well.
yeah, I remember in like grade 11 meeting with like a guidance counselor talking about possible careers, and that was sort of the time and stuff. And that was the first time that somebody had mentioned journalism. And the counselor kind of joked, well, you know, you're terrible at math, you get great marks in English, so maybe that might be something that you want to do. And then, you know, I sort of started looking into that. And this is back before the internet. So you didn't just look something up. Like you actually had to like
Right.
get on the bus at Holdham and Lougheed and, you know, get off at Brentwood Mall and then get on another bus to go to BCIT, you know, and actually walk into the school and say, hey, do you guys have any programs that are journalism related? And they had like a broadcast journalism program. So I was like, oh, hey.
Yes.
Yeah. So I started looking into that. So for a while, I was thinking of going into broadcast journalism. And
Okay.
then years later, I had applied to journalism school at BCIT. And then I heard myself on tape. And that was like, no, that's not
You didn't
going
like
to
it.
happen.
Most people don't.
I hated that. So, and then I found out about the Langara print journalism program, and
Okay.
I got accepted to both, and then I ended up choosing print. So, because by that time I writing for a school newspaper in Capilano College. Um, yeah, I'd sort of fallen in love with like, I mean, I'd already loved writing, but that's when I realized that, oh, hey, print journalism, not broadcast journalism, is more suited to my skills because I like writing longer stuff, whereas broadcasting is more short kind of writing and
Yes.
stuff. You know, it kind of slowly evolved over the years. You know, there weren't the same kind of
Okay.
programs in high school that there are now, you know, the kind of specialized kinds of things. Like there was no school, there wasn't a school newspaper back then. There was like a, you could work for the annual grad book committee, and there was a
Right.
little bit of writing for that. But other than that, there wasn't any kinds of programs that there was very little. The only like programs for careers was like automotive, and trade stuff. So and things have
Okay.
thankfully changed so much. And I've had so many high school students over the years that are in actual journalism programs in high school. Yeah,
Really?
I wish that I could have had something like that back then, but it all worked out or whatever. But yeah, so it was a slow evolution as far as career stuff goes.
And those were kind of, I mean, really the glory days of journalism, right?
For
The
print
days,
journalism,
I
yeah,
would say,
especially. Well, yeah, print,
right?
radio,
So,
and TV. I mean, radio news was huge back then. I mean, it's a shell of itself now. I mean, News 1130 is great, but there used to be multiple stations that covered news and had multiple radio reporters. And then you had all the print. Even community newspapers were so much bigger back then. Every community had two competing newspapers back then. Sometimes even,
which there should
yeah,
be.
sometimes even three, just for community papers. Then you got all the dailies. There was the old I don't know if you grew up in Metro Vancouver. Do you remember the old Columbian newspaper? That was a,
I do
yeah,
know of
that was
it, but
another
I came here as a young
yeah, that was
adult.
another, daily newspaper that ended up folding, but became the Burnaby Now newspaper that shut down earlier this year. Out of
Yes,
that and a couple other
sadly.
community papers rose out of the ashes of the old Columbian newspaper and stuff. So there was a lot of media around. There was so much stuff, and even like the Daily, the Sun, and the Province. Back then, they were so different from they are now because they're owned by the same company, and there's not a lot of differences between them. They run a lot of the same story.
Their resources.
Yeah, back then it was a blood feud between the Sun and the Province, which was great and produces amazing journalism. Competition, I think that's one of my biggest laments is the lack of competition because competition breeds better journalism because it's like for community papers when there's only one in a town. Because I worked for Glacier Media for a few years with my hometown paper, the Burnaby Now, which I actually delivered when I was a teenager for a while. I delivered the Now, and then I
Neat.
became editor, and then I was the editor of the Tri-City News and the New Westminster Record all at the same time. But we didn't have competitors really. I mean, the odd bigger media would cover a story in our area, but for the most part, and it's bad because sometimes it'd be like, well, I guess I don't have to do it today. I can do it tomorrow. It's not like somebody else is
Right.
going to do that story and stuff. And that's not good.
You're not going to get
Yeah,
scooped.
you
Yeah.
don't want to get scooped. And in the old days, most of my time was spent in Maple Ridge. It was the old Times newspaper, which I was a reporter at and then became editor. And then there's the Maple Ridge News, which is still around. And man, like it was, I mean, we were friendly to each other on the scenes and stuff, fires and stuff like that. But, it was a bloodbath, right? Because that's what competition is. You got to differentiate yourself. And it just produced such great journalism back then and stuff.
So why the focus on, I mean, was it a conscious decision or is it kind of just how things evolved that you focused on community news throughout your career versus branching off onto other types of print?
I was like most of my classmates at Langara. Like you go through the program with like the same 20 people,
Yeah.
and then through attrition, it drops a little bit. I think we finished with 16. And most of us wanted to work for a big daily newspaper and had dreams of the Globe and Mail or the Vancouver Sun or whatever and stuff. I was the same way. But to do that, like very few people got hired out of college. So, your best bet was to go to a small town, work at a community paper, make all your mistakes, learn, and then work your way back. So I started off doing like vacation relief during my first and second year of journalism school for community newspapers, one in Maple Ridge, one in Abbotsford, one in Chilliwack, in my 1973 Ford Pinto, driving out to Chilliwack, praying that it got there, with my engine rattling, barely keeping it
Yes.
on the road and doing vacation relief. This was back in the days when somebody went on vacation, they actually brought in somebody to fill in. I mean, they don't do that stuff anymore because of cost cutting, but and I
Yeah.
was hired for like a whole summer to work in Langley and Abbotsford and Chilliwack and Maple Ridge and go from paper to paper to paper. 1 week working as a photographer, 1 week writing sports, 1 week writing news, and flipping between the papers and stuff. And you get like a real crash course in everything because you don't know anything after your first year, but you're cheap, so they hire you.
Right.
I think I was getting paid like $4.50 an hour, and to me that was like, oh my god, they're paying me to do this. Yeah, and they
Yeah.
would help me with gas money and stuff like that, and they buy you meals and they take pity on you and bring in extra donuts and stuff because they know you're a starving student and stuff. And it's great, like you get to do everything. And then I stayed on
Hmm.
with Maple Ridge when I went back to journalism school, the Times newspaper, because, and this is a funny story that relates to now. So during my first summer, my second summer, I had been working for the Times. I helped cover like a provincial election. Um, anyways, so during one of those summers, Pitt Meadows got a brand new movie theater, and I'm a huge movie fan, movie nerd even back then, and I got to cover the opening of this new movie theater. And back then there were no theaters around. There was no Cineplex in Pitt Meadows like there is now. There was no theater anywhere. I think like as I remember, the nearest theater was like Lougheed Mall in Burnaby back then. And people in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows and Poker Quillam, they had nowhere to go to a movie. They have to drive. So this was a big deal. And I got to cover this and stuff. And I got to go to like the first day of the movie theater and stuff. And it's funny because my work now is with Surrey, but I'm also writing for The Ridge, which is a newsletter for Maple Ridge Pitt Meadows. And in Pitt Meadows, that same movie theater just shut down. So I went into the last movie on the last day. And then I wrote like a retrospective piece. But that was 35 years later. So I was like, holy crap, like that's how long I've been doing it. Is like one of my first assignments was 35 years previous, and here I was writing about the same place and stuff. So covering that movie theater was a big deal because I was, I'll be honest, even though I was up in Burnaby, I still consider myself like Vancouver because a lot of my family lived in Vancouver, and I was a big city snob. So going out to Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows was like, what is this place? Like, back then, like, I remember covering a council meeting in like 1991 and getting out at 8:30 at night and being like, well, I guess I better go get something to eat. I'm starving. And like everything shut down. Like the whole town I was like, what is this place and stuff? So I had a bit of a negative attitude about working for a community newspaper, but I thought, oh well, I'll suck it up and I'll go work there and then I'll work my way back to the big city. But then once I got
Yeah.
there and my first job turned out to be in Maple Ridge, my first permanent job, Maple Ridge Pitt Meadows, and I fell in love with the place. Like it took a while, but you start meeting people that are way different from what I'm used to in the city and stuff. Like, the first time you go out into a farmer's field in Maple Ridge to interview a dairy farmer, and he looks at this 21-year-old punk, wearing all black because I used to wear a lot of black back then, looking at me like, who are you and stuff, and my spiked hair and stuff, and you start to realize that, hey, maybe I don't know everything, and maybe I need to be a little different so I can communicate with other people because I'm a journalist and you need to be able to find common ground with people. So maybe you should learn more about them and not be a snob and stuff. And it was a tough lesson because for a while I couldn't get anybody to talk to me because I just looked so young and I looked too big city-ish and stuff with, my Fox and Fluvog shoes and stuff. I don't know if anyone remembers that place.
I
Yeah.
do.
So yeah, you start to realize that you got to dress a little differently when you work at a community paper in a small town, and you got to act a little differently, and you got to relate to people more and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
really learned a lot of lessons and really had to mature a lot. And my editor at the time, his name was Bill Marler, and like he just used to laugh at me, not in a negative way, but he just used to like laugh, and he'd be like, because they all knew I was just young and they loved my enthusiasm, but knew I had to grow up a lot and stuff. And they gave me a crash course to do that. And I still didn't think that I was going to stick around, but I ended up sticking around for 20 years and becoming editor and stuff. And it was a slow process, but you start to meet people and make friends and develop ties in the community.
Yeah.
Working at a community paper is great, especially for young journalists. And when you get college students to do the practicums with you, they don't necessarily want to come to a community paper, but then they once they get there, they realize that, oh, this is a great place to train because, when you work at a
I
big
bet.
media outlet, if you're still in college, they don't necessarily give you a lot to do. Like
Right.
you literally will be getting people coffee and running errands and doing some fact checking and stuff like that. But at a community paper, they just give you everything because they need you to do everything because they're small staffs.
Yeah.
So my first few years, I was writing sports, I was writing covering schools, I was crime, I was going to court, I was covering councils and stuff. I mean, I was doing everything, art stories, writing the weekly movie review for the movie theater and stuff, which was my favorite part of the job and stuff. And I got to know the owner of the movie theater, he's passed away now, but he was a Maple Ridge school teacher that was a big movie nerd too. And he's like, why does my town not have a movie theater? So him and his wife got together, borrowed a bunch of money, and I think they remortgaged their house and they built this movie theater, a 3-screen theater. And like that story just really shook me. I was just amazed that people were out there doing stuff like this, and I'd never met anyone. And him and I became friends, even though he was old enough to be my father. We became friends over movies. He didn't always like my movie reviews, and he'd give me a hard time. And he once phoned up my editor and started yelling because he didn't like this review I wrote and stuff. But he was always nice about it to me and stuff, and we became really good friends. And you start making those kind of ties and stuff, and you start getting deeper into it, and you get a lot of freedom to just kind of write everything and anything. I'd pitch my editor on a 3-part series, and he'd be like, "Yeah, sure. How much space do you want? Do you want 2 double pages in every issue for the next 3 weeks?" Okay,
Wow.
and you get a
Yeah.
lot of freedom to do stuff like that, and yeah, I really,
Yeah.
and after a few years, I started hearing about opportunities to get closer to the city and stuff. And by then, I had a long time girlfriend in Maple Ridge. I started thinking that, geez, maybe I'm going to stick it out here and stuff. And it was like I said, it was a slow process. And then I started to realize that I wanted to become an editor. And that was the best way to do that. So I was like, okay, so I'll try and become an editor at a community paper. And then I'll start to think about moving closer to the city and stuff. But that's not how it turned out. And, the more I worked in community papers, the more I just loved it because you really do get to know everything about your community. And I realized that
Yeah.
again after I got laid off by Post Media in Maple Ridge. I ended up at a daily in Vancouver for 5 years. A commuter daily, I don't know if you remember 24 Hours.
Hmm.
Them in
Hmm.
Metro, once again, big competitors
Yeah.
handing out papers at the SkyTrain stations and stuff. Yeah, I worked at the Commuter Daily as an editor for 5 years, and it was great. It was a great experience. But by that time, I was like, it just felt, it just didn't feel the same. I mean, you'd write news stories, and there's interesting stuff to write about and stuff, but you didn't have the kind of connections that I found that I had at a community paper, and then I found that I really craved.
Yeah.
People would invite, when I was in Maple Ridge, especially in Pitt Meadows, like you'd get invited to everything. And not just to write
Hmm.
about, but they'd just be like, they would get to know you. And because I used to write a weekly column that where I'd write about, having a baby and raising a kid and being married and all the fun, I used to write funny columns and stuff. People recognize you in the grocery store, which used to drive my daughter absolutely nuts and stuff. Um, but yeah, because in a small town, when your picture's in the paper, some people tend to recognize you and stuff, and not always in a good way.
Hmm.
Sometimes you get yelled at and stuff. I mean,
Yes. Yes.
people used to be pretty respectful. We'll get into that more later with some of your questions and stuff, how the respect level has sort of changed over the years and stuff. Yeah, being in a community and
Yeah.
stuff, like I don't know, you find stuff out earlier than so many people, and it's a great feeling, and you live and work in your community, and you really have more of a personal stake in it and stuff, and yeah, it
Yeah.
ended
I
up
mean,
really
you
appealing to me.
You said it. I think you said it perfectly. I believe this is in your bio. You said that's where you feel the heartbeat of a community is via
Yeah,
community
yeah.
news. And
Because
that's so true. They're so rich, those
when I worked for
stories.
24 hours, I mean, sometimes I'd have to drive out to Surrey to go cover, after a crime had happened, and like the gang unit is based out in Surrey. So you'd have to drive out there and you go there, and it's something specific about, say, Surrey or another area, and you're going to that area, and then you leave, and then you write about it, and then you forget about Surrey, and you go back to writing about Vancouver or something like that. It's just the nature of the beast, And after working in community papers, like I came to not resent, but if there was like a big story that became bigger provincial or national news, like in Maple Ridge, for example, you're probably too young for this. I don't know if you ever heard of the flamingo killer. Oh, some guy in Maple Ridge years ago, back in the days when Vancouver, where the aquarium is, they also had a zoo with polar bears
Okay.
and penguins, and they had flamingos. And I don't know, some idiot from Maple Ridge got drunk one night with his friends, and he jumped into the flamingo pen and killed a bunch of the flamingos. And
Hey.
anyways, he got arrested and identified, and it became national news that Maple Ridge, the home of the flamingo killer. And all of a sudden, we had like TV trucks parked outside the police station and stuff. And, you start to get protective. It's like, yeah, I understand it's a goofy story and stuff, but it's giving my town a bad name and stuff. And that's when I really realized that, oh man, I'm really hooked in this place. So, because I started to look
Yeah.
at it in like a protective kind of way and stuff. And it's no fault of like big media for doing that, but that's what it is. They come in, they'll cover that, and then they'll leave. And they won't come back until there's another catastrophic story and stuff. Whereas community papers were there, we tell negative stories, but we're also telling positive stories. We're telling the sort of whole gamut of things and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think that leads us to Surrey. And, Surrey has traditionally, via larger mainstream media, a lot of the sensational stories have been negative. I live in Surrey now, have for about a year and a half now. We love it. We wish we had moved here so much sooner. We're in a rural area, which we just absolutely love. And it's only via the Surrey Now and now via the Surrey
Yes.
Citizen that we will be able to read those stories about what is happening hyper locally, because that's what matters to us. Like, we spend most of our time in this area. We want to know, what is happening this weekend, what took place, what is opening, what should concern us, what are the big issues, what are the big political, things on the agenda that we should be paying attention to, what are the educational, all those hyper local things that I think, people don't realize are so incredibly valuable to them in their community, that if they were gone, they would really, really miss it. I always say to clients, a community news profile piece is so valuable because you're reaching an engaged community. I'm sure your audience, your readers, were so engaged with what you were reading, which I'm sure that felt good too, right? People are reading and they're engaged and they're paying
Yeah.
attention, whether they
Yeah.
like your writing or not, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the old days, people just used to phone. I mean, before email, they would just phone you up, or they'd just come to the news office. They just walk in and give you their 2 cents. And sometimes it was positive, sometimes it was negative. But it's like you say, at least they're reading, at least, and they care. It shows you that they care in that. I mean, nowadays, the people that contact you, it's not necessarily because they care. It's often because they're conspiracy theorists, and we'll get into that more later. But yeah, back then, I mean, people would care. I mean, even in my days in Burnaby working for the paper, people would come in off the streets, and sometimes it'd just be like I had this one guy. He was like in his 70s, and he was just at his wit's end. He didn't really know how to use the internet, and he needed to find a lawyer because he felt like he was being taken advantage of.
Mm.
He came to his community newspaper office because he thought, hey, maybe they know something. And I sat down with them, and we Googled some stuff and came up with some options and stuff like that. And I said, hey, if like he felt like his landlord was taking advantage of him and stuff.
Right.
I said, hey, down the road, if you're not getting satisfaction and you feel like it's worth doing a story, you contact me, but otherwise, good luck. I never heard back from him, and I hope that he got the help he needed. But that's a great feeling that people feel like they can look to you as more than just a place to read a story, but you're part of the community. So, and
Mm-hmm. With
I'll get
the
into that more with what we're trying to do, with the Citizen and stuff. But it's not just about writing stories and telling stories. It's about being an essential part of people's lives.
Yep, a voice, holding people
Yeah.
accountable. Let's talk about the Surrey Citizen. So that this is currently we have one community newspaper in Surrey, the Surrey Now.
Now
The
leader,
Surrey Citizen.
the
What's
now
that?
leader.
The Now
They
Leader.
combined the
Yes,
Surrey
thank you.
Now and the News Leader into the Now Leader.
I am speaking with the absolute expert of community news, so I have to be very factual. Sorry about that. The Surrey Now Leader, yes. And now we have the Surrey Citizen. And, I worked with you, I think mostly, Chris, when you were editor over at Burnaby Now, and I was living in Burnaby at the time. So I would probably pitch you stories. I know I would pitch you stories for clients who were doing Burnaby activity, but also I believe I pitched you stories about things that I was personally concerned with that were happening in the Burnaby community. Now here is the Surrey Citizen. Surrey is, many people know, BC's fastest growing city. It is growing at a rapid pace. Tell us about the Surrey Citizen. What is this platform to be? What are your hopes for it? Let's talk about the
Yeah.
Surrey Citizen.
So the Citizen is so it's a news website, and it right now it's a once a week newsletter that people can subscribe to for free. Get it straight in their inbox. Arrives every Wednesday. The plan is to expand to 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, and build the subscriber base and that. So it's run by something called Constellation Media, which is a nonprofit group. It has a board of directors, just volunteers, accepts donations. They do try and sell advertising, but the main focus is, donors. And so Constellation runs three entities right now. One is the Ridge, which is
Mm-hmm.
in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows. So I've returned to doing some stories I've come full circle to Maple Ridge. And they also have the Tri-Cities Dispatch, which is a newsletter that comes out 5 days a week. And so Constellation Media as a nonprofit, so it's what they call mission driven independent journalism. So it's a different kind of model. It's not like a corporate model where they're obviously, you're obviously trying to make a profit so you can pay your staff and run the operation. So they receive donations. There's big donors, there's small donors. Any big donor over $5,000 gets listed on the website. Like it's not the kind of nonprofit where you like issue tax receipts and stuff. Like it's not like a charity. It's a nonprofit, and it's structured like that where they can accept donations and that, and do a little advertising and some sponsorships and stuff. Like I think the city of Coquitlam is like a sponsor for the Tri-Cities Dispatch, and you see them up there, and they accept various sponsorships and stuff. You don't have to donate. Okay. Some people have been wondering about that because they've received like a fundraising letter. No, it's free. But if you feel like you want to support independent journalism with a few dollars or more a month, or even just a one-time thing, it's easy to donate. But you're not under any obligation. But it's all a matter of funding independent journalism. And the kind of journalism that Constellation is looking at is, like I said, mission driven. They subscribe to something called the Atkinson Principles, and people can Google that. And it's on the website what the principles are. But basically, in a nutshell, it's trying to move forward conversations on important issues towards reform, whether it's political reform, social reform, economic reform. It's aimed towards moving towards some kind of positive reform that's going to benefit people. That's the main goal. It's not about, and the newsletter is central to that. I mean, stories get posted to the website, and then the newsletter has like the first part of the story, in a nutshell, the main stuff. And then you can click to go to the website if you want to read like a deeper dive into more on that story. But the model is less about the website and it's more about the newsletter, because, corporate news models, especially for online news, it's about web traffic. It's about generating views, because the more views you get, the more ads you can sell, that kind of thing. And so, and I fell not victim to this, but you fall into this too, where you're constantly chasing stories that have done well online and you use analytics, but a lot of stories that do well online aren't necessarily the greatest kind of journalism. Like, it's frustrating when
No.
you write like a great 2000 and very few people read it online, and then you write a story about somebody winning $100,000 in the lottery and 26,000 people read that. And
Right.
yeah, so, and you can't help but be colored by that. I mean, there's
Right.
still important journalism being done by what I would call corporate sites and stuff like that. And they're trying to find new and inventive ways to package that. And they're doing newsletters too and things like that. But our model is not necessarily worrying about how many views you get on the website. It's more about getting an engaged subscriber base, people that are committing to signing up for journalism. These are people that are choosing, they're not finding it by accident because they saw it on Twitter or saw it on Facebook. Of course, you can't see Facebook stories anymore because of the Facebook ban, but you don't find it through some other venue and decide to click on it and read it and whatever. These are people that have signed up saying, hey, I want to know about Surrey. I want to know about the Tri-Cities or Richmond or whatever as a subscriber. And it's free and I'm going to read it. And yeah, because you want to build those engaged subscribers, people that are committed to it. And
Yes.
hopefully they're going to see the value of your journalism and they're going to want to
Mm-hmm.
eventually contribute through a donation. That is obviously ideal. But
Yes.
the fact that they're going to read and they want to be part of those conversations and those important issues and stuff. So a lot of the stories that I'm going to be focusing on and have been focusing on are less about things like breaking news, because we're only once a week newsletters, so it's
Right.
necessarily hard to do
Right.
that. So we have to be a little more creative about the timing of things. Some stories they're going to be dated maybe the following week and stuff. So you got to find ways to build on that initial story and do something that maybe delves deeper into that issue. So we don't necessarily write a lot of crime stories. It's more, certain types of crimes are happening. Why are they happening? What are the societal issues that
Right.
are necessarily causing that? And can we write a feature that maybe addresses those things and maybe looks at possible solutions and stuff and what people are working on and stuff. So it's finding more about that. Um, Surrey Council may make a decision on some new housing project. We don't necessarily write about all the housing projects that are coming up. Instead, I want to look at the bigger picture of, they've approved a certain number of projects that's going to equal a certain number of units. Why are they doing that? What is the pressure that the provincial government's putting on them to build more housing? What are the obstacles to getting that housing built? How are they trying to remove the barriers to meet those goals and stuff? And then write about those kinds of things. So we're trying to do more big picture kinds of stories that, like I said, move forward conversations on those issues.
I like this idea of digging deeper into this feature piece, and I was talking about this with a couple of prior guests this season. Actually, is the unfortunate lack of feature writers, and there are some very talented ones who are still writing great pieces. Laurie Colbert at The Sun is one that comes to mind, but there are fewer than ever, right? And those in-depth features that take more than an afternoon to write are often the kinds of stories that will reveal pretty meaningful things that can create change, can, make people second guess their views and thoughts. So I love that idea of really being, like you say, mission driven and being able to dig a bit deeper. The Surrey Citizen, you're senior reporter there, but essentially really you're leading content at the Citizen,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
And
And your social media presence?
yeah, and before we get into the, and there will be shorter kinds of things, more, there'll be fun stories
Yeah, I've seen some.
and stuff that maybe has sort of not a humorous look, but a lighter side of your community. Interesting people, fascinating people that are just doing incredible things, and short little, not factoids, but short little things that just let you know a little bit more about your community, like a quick look at demographics in your community. What are the different languages that people speak? What are the percentages and stuff like that? Um, so it's just finding sort of an interesting mix. So people, when they open it up in in their inbox, are going to be able to read 5 or 6 things, some short, some longer, but it's still a pretty quick read, and they'll feel like they really found out something new about their community and that. Yeah, so that it'll be, like I said, kind of a mix of those kinds of things.
Very cool. No, I was thrilled when I saw. I love the team at the Surrey Now Leader. That being said, I think competition is fantastic, especially in such a large municipality like Surrey. And the model that the Surrey Citizen is presenting, I think, is fantastic and much needed. And so I was thrilled to see that it's coming and it's available. I'll link
And
to the website where you can subscribe to the newsletter,
yeah, and I
etc.
will say that, like the Now Leader, which is actually being run now by my former assistant editor, Julie McClellan, who is an incredible journalist. So Surrey is like lucky to have her as editor of that paper, and they've got some really good reporter. I think they're losing one of the reporters who is leaving to go to Post Media, but hopefully they'll rehire for that. And they do great arts coverage and stuff. So it's up to me to find a way to sort of differentiate myself from them, because I can't always keep up with the kind of daily kinds of breaking stuff that they do. So
Sure.
it's looking at alternative kinds of ways. And the hope is that people will read both and sort of get like a whole gamut of different types of stories and stuff like that. So it's competition, but it's also, you feel,
They
yeah, you feel
complement.
like you want to complement each other as far as the type of stories you're doing, and the coverage you're doing and stuff. And then Surrey, because Surrey deserves it. Like it's like you said, it's such a huge place. It's so fast growing. There's so many incredible things going on. I mean, right now, writing for once a week, the difficulty is finding what I'm actually going to put in there, because I'll have like a story list of 15 stories, and I have to cut
I
it down
bet.
some way to find the absolute best stuff that I want to write about and stuff. So I'll be happy when we expand to multiple days in a week, because then I'll be able to have more of those stories and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it's to happen. It's with the kind of population that's growing here, the diversity, and just like you say, so many things on the go. There's certainly a need for it. I wanted to ask your opinion, Chris, on journalists on social media.
Yes.
What do you think about individual reporters and editors being present and engaging on the platforms? I mean, most are,
Yeah.
for the most part. It's hard for me to think of one that
No.
isn't, but they choose their platforms usually and are different in the way in which they approach them. What are your thoughts on it?
I think it's incredibly important that journalists, I
Hmm.
mean, whether some journalists might not agree with me, but you have to sell journalism now more than ever. You have to sell the stories you're working on, the outlets that you work for. You have to promote. You have to be active. It's gone from the days like the community paper that I used to work for, where your stories appeared in the paper and they dropped it at everybody's doorstep. People picked up the paper, and I mean, not everyone read, but they would pick it up and they'd read your stories. It was right there, handed to them. You don't have that nowadays.
Yeah.
You have to promote. You have to get, because there's so many things distracting people, streaming and Spotify and all this kind of stuff. And you got to find new and inventive ways to do that. And social media is a great way to do that. There's journalists that are very active, that are big TikTok users, that are selling their brand, sorry, promoting their brand on TikTok, shorter versions that will gather an audience into their brand. So they'll make that extra step to read the stories online that they write, and or watch the TV station that they work for, or whatever. I think, yeah, it's important to promote that. Now, having said that, it's easy for me to say as a white male journalist, hey, be on social media and promote yourself and stuff, because I don't face the kind of blowback that women do, racialized women do, or racialized journalists, period, or journalists of color, however you
Yeah.
want to call it. The
Yeah.
abuse they take is just on a whole other level.
Yeah.
I faced abuse, especially during like the height of COVID and stuff. I mean, the emails I used to get were horrific and
I
stuff,
bet.
but it's nothing compared to what journalists who aren't white males face. It's just on all levels. So I understand if some are sort of shy and don't necessarily want to put themselves out there and stuff. It's a tough call. And
Hmm.
sometimes they're the outlets that they work for aren't necessarily as supportive as they need to be because it's more of a newer kind of thing in the last few years, and some don't always know how to respond and stuff. But we've seen lots of examples. It's really bad in the US of journalists being hounded and over expressing their views. I mean, that's a tough one too.
Hmm.
I mean, you're promoting your stories, but you're also promoting your views, and sometimes that opens you up to accusations of bias and stuff. So it's a tough one to straddle
Yes.
and stuff. I try and be careful about the stories that I write. I mean, I'll express opinions about certain kinds of things, often more general kinds of policy kinds of things, like about housing and stuff and things that I would like to see, but not necessarily personal opinions on the stories that I'm writing. I just want to make sure I'm not compromising my objectivity for more sensitive stories and stuff. So you just have to kind of use your common sense and stuff. So, but yeah,
Yeah. I never thought of that. Actually, it's a vital point. Is being able to express your opinions while being seen by many as kind of you're a human being, obviously, but you have your own opinions. But as a reporter or following a mandate of presenting balanced news, how you balance that sounds like you're managing it, but that's 35 years of
yeah,
experience in journalism. So it's interesting how young journalists may struggle with that, especially having grown up on the digital platforms. Working in journalism can also be stressful, as I'm sure you well know, especially during the times of COVID. And, we talked about, fake news and the attacks on journalism. And we had a lot of, theories around journalism. I've always been a very vocal, very, very protective of journalism and journalists and the work that they do. But, are there times when in this divided society and journalism sits there in the center of it, how do you ensure that you have balance and that your mental health is well while being a journalist in this time?
yeah, that's a tough one because it's hard not to take some things personally. I mean, during COVID, when COVID really hit big, and there were like the daily press conferences by Bonnie Henry, and people were just gobbling up any kinds of scraps of information and stuff. I mean, like I felt like I was doing an important job informing people about that. But then you would start getting these messages on Facebook and emails about, how dare you spread misinformation? And I emailed back saying, well, what are you talking about? Well, Bonnie Henry, you guys wrote about her press conference today. And I was like, well, and what's misinformation? Well, the whole thing. It's hard to argue with somebody that's a conspiracy theorist because you can't use facts and logics because they just think that the whole thing is a hoax. The COVID vaccine, it was all experimental,
Mm-hmm.
and how dare you even write about it? Like, it wasn't just that they didn't agree with what you were writing, they objected to you writing about any health official, anything. And I try and explain that to people and they don't believe me, but it's true. They didn't want you to utter anything about it. They wanted COVID to be not spoken by journalists at all. They wanted it to be silenced as much as possible. I'm not exaggerating. Like, and you get through, oh, at the end of this, there's going to be Nuremberg trials and journalists are going to be hanging from the gallows and stuff. And so
Wow.
I don't know if my mental health was hurt by that because I have a pretty thick skin. I've been threatened by the best organized gangs and stuff like that. So I'm kind of used to that, but it took a toll on my faith in humanity because
Yeah,
I've
me
always
too.
run into conspiracy theorists over the years and stuff. I mean, there's still people out in Maple Ridge, out in a place called Ruskin, which is far east Maple Ridge, who swear that it's a haven for UFOs and stuff. I mean, but those were more fun kinds of conspiracy theories, whereas now it's so hateful and angry and threatening that you find yourself questioning when you write certain types of stories. Oh God, am I really going to write about this? Am I really going to get more of those emails and stuff? But then you kind of try and find a way to power through that because you don't want them, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to bully journalists into avoiding that stuff. And
Silence. Yeah.
It works in a lot of ways on a lot of different issues and stuff, not just
Hmm.
conspiracy stuff. I won't mention certain issues, but there's certain international issues that we all know that anytime anybody talks about it, um, no matter what side you're on it, another side is trying to bully that person down because they don't agree with it and stuff. That's what gets frustrating is that
Hmm.
as journalists is that there's a lot of people that no longer want to hear any kind of view that they don't agree with. And they
Hmm.
don't just disagree with it, they don't want to hear it. They want media outlets that are only going to tell them stories from the point of view that they agree with. And they're
Yeah, which is a big problem.
intractable on it. They just don't.
Yeah.
Why? How dare you interview that person because they're whatever and stuff like that. And I get it. Some people are not necessarily credible sources, but some people are. But they're just sharing a view
Hmm.
that. And it's not just people on the right wing. I mean, there's people on different sides of the political spectrum that just don't want to hear from anybody else that they don't agree with, and it's become more and more polarized and stuff. And yeah, so it wears you down, and you got to just find ways to get past it and keep reminding yourself of why you're doing it. But like I said, that's a lot easier to get around than some of than you know an Asian journalist being having racist slurs thrown at them in their email or on Twitter or something like that. I mean, it's not even comparable and stuff. I don't. I wish I had advice for those journalists for how to not have that mentally destroy you and stuff. I just. So it's a lot easier for me to get around the certain types of abuses that I've sort of faced and stuff because it's just I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not easy, but I suppose that, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, it might be a tad easier, but it's not. It's definitely not easy. And I think this is what I'm always reminding people is number one, journalists are not paid multi-million dollars a year to do their work. They usually do it because they are incredibly passionate about what they're doing and they are vital to keep the wheels turning in a society that's civil. I don't know what's come up from underground with this lack of our ability to civilly discuss issues. I've had guests on my podcast, and I need to have more who I disagree with because I think it's
But it's
important
hard. It's
to have those
I mean,
conversations,
I find
right?
myself sometimes too, be on Twitter. I refuse to call it that other name, but it'll always be Twitter to me. And sometimes I see, people expressing views in news stories and stuff that make me angry and stuff. Yeah. I mean, one thing that lesson I learned a long time ago, and I try and share with young journalists that helped me was that I learned early on that it doesn't matter what you write, somebody is going to be offended by it. I mean, not
Yes.
always. You won't always hear it, but you can guarantee that it doesn't matter. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was in Maple Ridge. It was during a huge heat wave, and our weekend photographer got a photo of a dog up at a public fountain, one of the city fountains, and the dog was drinking out of the fountain. And it was this really cute photo of the dog, and it was sort of a symbol of just how hot it was because it was like it wasn't quite the heat dome, but it was really bad heat wave, 15 whatever years ago. And I had that photo on the front page because it was really cute. He's a cute dog, and he's drinking, the splashing all over the place. Well, like people who don't like dogs, like freaked out. My inbox was just filled with letters to the editor. Not just they were
My.
angry at the person who let the dog drink out of the fountain, but they were also angry at me for putting that photo in the paper. And how dare I promote this disgusting behavior? I mean,
Mhm.
and of course, I ran a few of those letters, and then the next week, all the dog lovers responded, and it became this war between
Debate.
dog lovers, and dog haters and stuff. But it was just such an innocuous thing, and I thought, there's no way that somebody can be offended by that. But you learn that hey, it doesn't matter. Somebody is going to get upset, and once you accept that, it makes it a little
Yeah.
easier when people get upset by things because you're sort of prepared that something's going to bother somebody. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong for being bothered by it. It's just the nature of
Hmm.
people. People you have to, as a journalist, you have to accept so many different perspectives that are different from your own. And it's not always easy because sometimes I'm interviewing people and they'll say stuff and I'm totally disagree with them. But I'm not trying to get into an argument with them. I'm trying to understand where they're coming from. I mean, within reason. I mean, if somebody's just blatantly spewing racist hatred and stuff, that's different stuff. But, there's other kinds of things that, I don't necessarily agree with, but are fair comment and stuff like that. So it's trying to accept that there's people that you don't agree with, but there's fewer and fewer people that are accepting of other points of view. And I can't imagine as a podcast interviewer that, because you have to do an interview with somebody and you don't, who's the podcaster in Vancouver?
Moamir?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he interviews people that I'm like, why are you interviewing him? I hate that person. But hey, I appreciate that he does that because he's and he takes a lot of abuse too for interviewing people that other people hate and stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a very limited experience, but in my guest writing about communications and PR issues, I mean, these are not issues that affect the average person. I will get a lot of comments, and I just stopped reading them, and I couldn't believe how many people were paying attention to my measly writing. And it's like, really? I mean, and they would go on. And again, some of that did come back as per the content of the comments to the fact that I'm a woman. And I said, you know what? This is not, and that's an advice that I got from a journalist friend of mine. Is just don't.
And then there's all the retired school teachers that want to write to you to they think they're correcting your grammar and every dangling modifier and preposition at the end of a sentence or whatever. Because I mean, and some of it's true and some of it's not because some English teachers, their type of English is a more stricter version than what journalism is and stuff. I mean, then there's those people that, you think you've written this amazing piece and then somebody isn't even paying attention to what the content is. They just want to point out that, your subject verb agreement isn't what they think it should be. That can be just
that they would notice
just demoralizing.
Yeah.
The good thing about online journalism is that you can change stuff online. It's if you ever make an error and it hits newsstands and print, you can't fix that. You're screwed.
Right. Right. Or broadcast, like you say, right? It's played over and over and then it's memed and that's true. No, I think, out of this, even out of the negativity that we're seeing and the division that we're seeing in culture, I think once again, it comes back even more so to the value of media, the value of journalism and the value of a new digital outlet such as the Surrey Citizen that Chris Campbell is leading up here in Surrey, British Columbia. As we wrap up here, just a couple of quick questions for you, Chris. When we are not covering local news, how do you spend your time in Burnaby?
Well, my fiance and I, we love Burnaby Lake. We go to Burnaby Lake all the time. That's where I proposed to her. I love, the last few weeks have been when all the baby geese arrived and stuff. I'm a sucker for animals. So anyways, we go to a lot of lakes. We do a lot of walking. We love to travel. I'm an obsessed Boston sports fan. So I'm constantly reading about the Celtics and the Red Sox and the Patriots. Not the Bruins. I'm a Canucks fan. So good. Spending time with my mom. Like I said, 86. We share a love of British crime shows and stuff. So we love doing that and stuff. I don't know. I've become more of a homebody over the years and stuff. So, yeah, our lives.
And enjoy your community.
Our lives are pretty boring and stuff, but
it's probably good that your lives are boring in your terms because I don't know, we like to stay pretty close to home ourselves. I like to ask guests about their favorite nonprofits. I like to learn about new ones, just get an idea about what matter to people. Are there a couple of nonprofits that are important to you?
Well, one is the ALS Society of BC. Now, I am biased because I've done a little bit of communications work for them, but it has become more than a job to me. The work that this society is doing to find a cure for ALS and to push forward the first meaningful clinical trials in BC, because right now there is no clinical trials in BC for ALS, and they're going to be doing the first and that. And this society has just been incredible. And the people that are raising money for them, the volunteers and stuff, I interviewed a woman who, her and her partner, they're traveling across Canada and doing 17 triathlons in every province and territory of Canada over the next few months to try and raise money. And they're hopped in their RV and just driving across Canada and stopping at all these places. Like, They're just like, she's just like, yeah, I'm going to take all this time off work and I'm just going to put all my money into this and do this and stuff. Like, this, it's part of journalism too. Like these people humble you because of the incredible stuff they're doing. And so ALS Society BC, Google them, look into what they're doing. They're a great place. The second one, and it's close to my heart, is Save Our Local News. That's the name of it. The website is saveourlocalnews.ca. So the papers that I used to work for Glacier in Tri-Cities, New West, and Burnaby, they got shut down in February and all the staff lost their jobs. Some of the reporters got together with their union and they've started a campaign to raise money because they're going to try and start sort of like a cooperative type of news outlet that will cover those communities. I'm assuming through newsletters and a website and stuff like that. So they've been going around to different councils. They've been at community events and they're trying to raise money. I don't know how much they've raised at this point, but it's just like what we're doing at Constellation and with the Surrey Citizen. We're trying to produce quality, independent journalism, and that costs money. Costs money to staff for the technology and the tools and stuff, web hosting, and that's what these 4 reporters are trying to do. So check it out and consider donating. Because right now in Burnaby and New West, there's not a lot. I mean, the Tri-Cities has Tri-Cities has the Dispatch with Constellation, and it's a great outlet that is doing great work and stuff. But we can always use more. And so, that's the second one. So, and sure, I'll mention my brother's. He's with the Down Syndrome Research Foundation, which is based in Burnaby. My brother is with that, and they're a great nonprofit. So that does incredible work. So.
Excellent. Perfect. ALS Society of BC, saveourlocalnews.ca, and the Down Syndrome Research Foundation. I'll link to all 3
Thanks.
below the episode.
You're amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing.
The audience should know that Rachel is one of the best at doing public relations and communications. When you receive a package from her, it answers all your questions. It's got everything that you need and stuff. I know that's one of the questions I don't think we got to, but one of my pet peeves is when you receive something from a PR person and they have the wrong contact name or the wrong contact number. Or, and you phone up the contact person and they're like, oh, I don't know why they put my name down and stuff. So that's like,
or they invite you to an event in Toronto and
exactly.
In Burnaby.
Yes, that too. But Rachel is one of the all-time greats. So
thank you. That's humbling. And thank you very much.
I think it's awesome that you're doing the podcast. And I wish you the best of luck in continuing to grow. And I love watching it. And I watch it mostly on YouTube and stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. What was a huge compliment coming from a veteran like Chris. SurreyCitizen.com is the website. And Chris Campbell is a 35-year veteran journalist here in British Columbia, senior reporter leading content at a brand new Constellation media outlet called the Surrey Citizen. Highly recommend you checking it out and following them and his activity. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, Chris.
Thanks for having me, and have a good day.